Soon to be here.
Okay, Chairman Anderson.
Here.
3 present. We do have a quorum.
Finally, we got a quorum.
Mr. Chairman, can you turn your microphone on so we can hear you via Zoom and YouTube, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I will turn my microphone on. So Chairman Prerogative, we're going to move House Bill 155 up to second place, House Bill 170 down to third place. We probably won't get to all these bills today, but we have to Wednesday when we can finish them off. So let's start with House Bill 166. Anybody want to present this bill? Does anybody want to present this bill? No? Okay. All right. We'll just get right into it then. This bill is to make sure that our coal facilities don't get closed too early or at all if we can help it. And there's various ways of keeping the doors open on our coal-fired power plants in the bill. And there's a few amendments to change a few things in it also. So is there anybody that'd like to speak on this House Bill 166, utilities presumptions?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Randall Luthi. I'm the Energy Advisor for Governor Gordon. First of all, thank you for your time this afternoon, and thank you for taking up these 2 bills. I think it's important to once again emphasize the governor is very much committed to carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Because we look at the declining thermal coal market, a major plank in the governor's strategy is to extend the life of coal through CCUS and developing additional products from coal. There's a good base to achieve the CCUS strategy through Senate File 159 of a couple of years ago and HB 200 last year. And the governor specifically commends you as legislators for taking what is apparently the first of its kind approach to keeping coal as a fuel for electricity. And our goal is to have Wyoming as home as the next CCUS facility. Again, burning coal is not the issue. It's the release of CO2 that's become the issue. CCUS is a part of that solution. And as we move forward, we must be mindful that one of the keys to making CCUS profitable is that we need to clearly identify and support a market for CO2. Certainly, enhanced oil recovery is one of those market avenues. And our approach with dealing with CCUS has always been somewhat, as I would call, a carrot and stick approach. Some would probably say it's been all stick, very little carrots, but I would tend to disagree to that. And again, our goal is provide the opportunity for private companies to be able to build CCUS units. However, unfortunately and fortunately, federal financial support will still probably be necessary and a great incentive to moving forward. So we're continuing our support for a broad use of the 45Q tax credit, and we're anxiously awaiting for the Department of Energy to flesh out their opportunities for funding for additional feed and hopefully pilot projects for CCUS. We share your frustration that utility companies have not publicly committed to CCUS projects as a part of their integrated resource plans. HB 166 and the other bill on your agenda now, 155, both continue to advance that strategy. It's the governor's ultimate goal to keep CCUS moving forward and that our electric grid remains reliable and provides 24-hour power, dispatchable power. And these bills both attempt to bring us towards that goal. We look forward to working with the sponsors of the bill and you members of the committee as you move this bill forward. We hope that you move them forward and work through the various amendments. And then just in closing, I would say you see the PSC is also here in full force, and they're certainly available to answer questions about, since they have to enforce the bills, about the bill and the effect of the amendments.
Any questions for Mr. Luthi? Any questions for Mr. Luthi? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Luthi.
Thank you.
Thanks
I'll
for
make
joining
my,
us today.
I'll get out of here. Yeah.
Make
thank
your
you.
getaway. Make your getaway. Did I hear that the PSC was here to like to speak? Let's go ahead. You think just because he walks in, he gets the floor? He comes after you, Mary. Is he going to join you?
It has not. It has not.
Oh, we can sit down. Mary, Mr. Former Representative Thrones forgot more about this. Most of us know. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, we're outnumbered. We're outnumbered, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and if you don't mind, and members of the committee, appreciate you taking the time to hear this. Really just trying to bring a bill to help and help our situation. I think it really does two things. I think it gives the Public Service Commission a couple more tools in the toolbox or arrows in the quiver. And hopefully to give us more time as we look at these issues moving forward. And so really, Mr. Chairman, the bill just does a couple things, and I'll just point those out to you. Really, it kind of builds on the work that we've done in the past with Senate File 159, House Bill 200. And the key is, I think it creates a rebuttable presumption. And, you know, our Public Service Commission is really a quasi judicial function, and it creates that presumption against the retirement of this reliable and dispatchable against these plants. And then also, I think, prevents the rate recovery for, if this presumption is not proven, then it prevents rate recovery on other forms of energy. And so that's, with that quick overview, Mr. Chairman, flip over to page 2 are definitions. And base load, dispatchable, retirement, what that means, electric generation, reliable. Some of these are already in statute, so we match those up. And then really the meat of the bill is on page 3, line 9, paragraph B. There should be a rebuttable presumption against early retirement. And I think you got a couple groups here that want to take the word early out. I don't think that does any harm to the bill. So that's really that part of it. And then it talks about what some of these presumptions are in Romanet 1 and 2 on page 3. Right? It's significant cost savings, and that it will not result in insufficient baseload electricity. And then also flipping over to page 4, some more on that presumption about dispatchability and reliability. And paragraph C then on page 4, line 8 says that without rebutting the presumption, it really takes you down then to 37.3.118, paragraph A, this rate recovery, the limitation on recovery of costs replacing electrical generation facilities. So, and that takes you over really to paragraph B on page 5. Now without, you can read that, but the rates charged by an electric public utility shall not include any recovery of or earnings on the capital costs associated with the new non-coal, non-natural gas electric generation facilities built. So prevents really this rate recovery on new generation that is not, when it hasn't been rebutted. And so that's really the bill. And I think there's a lot of people testify. I'm over in education. You probably don't need me. It'd probably be better if I wasn't here anyway. And but I'd stand for any questions. Mr. Chairman, it's pretty straightforward, simple little bill.
Any questions for Representative Horstman? Any questions? Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Am I
Thank you.
dismissed? Thank you. Mr.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining the bill too.
Thank you.
Ah,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, Mary.
Mary Throne with the Wyoming Public Service Commission. With me, I have Chairman Petrie and Deputy Chair Mike Robinson. We can all answer questions. I'm just going to highlight a few things on House Bill 166. Would you, looking at the definitions first, if you look at Romanet 2, dispatchable, we had proposed a definition on the other side that just simply cross-references 38101A2. We don't think and includes dispatchability needs to be there. We didn't notice that on the House side that had been inserted. And similarly on,
Mary, was that inserted later or was that?
I think, so on the House side, we provided technical amendments to the committee, and then it became a substitute bill. And I think maybe somebody thought that it needed to be added, but we think it creates issues with some of the other things we have going on in our statutes, and it's not necessary in our opinion. Maybe LSO has a different point of view. And then similarly on reliable, I would just put a period after Romanet 4 and delete, and includes reliability.
Before you carry on, I see we got a couple of representatives I should introduce. Representative Gray is with us and Representative Henderson is with us. Yeah. What's that? No, we're not, we're on 166, but 155 you can sure do.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you want me to talk about the amendments that we know are coming from Wyoming industrial energy consumers. I don't know if they've been distributed yet, or would you like me to wait?
I think we should talk about the bill and then wait till the amendment
Okay.
gets in, and then you can talk about it.
So there are some, I'll just say that there are some amendments coming that address some of our other technical comments. For instance, we had proposed in our technical amendments, taking out the term baseload electricity on page 2. That's really not a term. And if either of my colleagues want to jump in with a better discussion of this, baseload electricity doesn't have the meaning that it used to, and that's sort of been subsumed into reliable and dispatchable. I mean, what you get with baseload electricity, which is not a term that's used as much as it used to be, you get with dispatchable and reliable. So we don't need the reference to baseload electricity. And I think it creates some ambiguity. And the WIAC amendment that's coming covers that. So I think those were our primary comments, absent discussions about the amendments, but I'll wait till those are presented. We also would just point out now that there are some inconsistencies between 155 and 166, that the definitions are not the same. And I think it would be better to go, it's our view that the definitions in 166 probably work better. And I can point that out now before you work the bill. It's a little, it's hard to talk about both bills at once when you haven't actually brought up 155 yet. But if you look at, for instance, the differences are electric generation facility is defined differently in 166 than 155. And then 155 refers to closure as opposed to retirement. And I think it would be our suggestion that you make the definitions in 155 compatible with 166. And you could put the two together, but I mean, that's up to you.
Uh,
They're companion bills, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Throne, I'm looking at the wording on 155 and 166 for a electric generation facility, and it looks to me like it's word for word. Maybe they changed it already, huh?
So let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing. If you look at the engrossed version of 166, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Mhm.
electric generation facility on page 3
Right.
also includes an addition to generate reliable and dispatchable electricity for provision to customers. And 155 doesn't include the reference to reliable and dispatchable.
Yes, it does.
Not
My
in,
copy does. Maybe my copy's updated or something. It says reliable and dispatchable. You said something different.
in the definition of electric, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Mine different? Oh. Oh. Okay. Mine already has it in it, but that's okay.
Well, I'm just looking at the engrossed
We're looking at
version
engrossed 166.
and engrossed 155.
I'm looking at engrossed 155 too. But that's all right. We'll cross that when we come to 155. Thank you.
And then
What else, Mary?
155 refers to closure. And if we could just use retirement as opposed to closure in both, that would be better. Mr. Chairman, I assume that when these get put together in the green books, assuming you passed both, that they would go together in the same section. And so you would have the same definitions for both pieces.
I think you're right. And you're saying retirement, you don't want retirement, you want
No,
something different.
Mr. Chairman, we would prefer, just for consistency's sake, also with SF 159, we would prefer retirement in both. And then the definition of retirement in 166 calls it a closure. So it ties it all together. And apologize that we didn't catch that in 155 when we were providing technical amendments on that side.
All right, Mary, anything else on 166?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You two fellows don't have anything to add? Mary covered it all?
There was one other thing.
Oh, okay.
I'll go ahead. and take
Mr.
that,
Petrie?
Chairman. The operative language.
And your name is?
My name's Chris Petrie. I'm sorry.
All right, all
Chris
right.
Petrie, I'm the chairman of the Public Service Commission.
You need to get a microphone. If you could, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Petrie from the Public Service Commission. I'm the chairman over there. The other observation that we made was that the operative language in 155 could be, instead of trying to synchronize and coordinate all the definitions in the two bills, it appears to us that there's a potential to move that operative paragraph B from 155 into a combination bill with 166, so that the reliability considerations would become an element under the new language in 166 would be added. So adding this before authorizing or approving the closure of an electric generation facility. It's in the middle of page 2 of 155. As proposed in a rate case, integrated resource plan or other submission to the commission shall consider The effect on available, reliable, dispatchable electricity to Wyoming customers, the impact that any shortage of available energy nationwide may have on Wyoming customers. That would, because there's a lot of overlap in the definitions, that would fit in 166 right after the definitions.
So if we were a mind to make one bill out of them, that would be your
That would-
suggestion?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, anything else?
That's
Any
all.
questions for Mr. Petrie? Any questions? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Petrie.
Chairman.
Anyone else like to speak on House Bill 166? Yeah, yes, come forward. Grab a microphone, please.
Chairman, Senators, my name is Denise Parrish, and I'm currently a retired citizen in Cheyenne who had a 43-year career in the field of utility regulation.
Oh,
So I'm here to express some of my concerns about the bill, particularly the rulemaking pieces of the bill. The gist of it, and I'm going to read some of this because it goes a little faster if I do, so forgive me.
let us know where you are on the page, and what page you're on, please.
Okay, the gist of the bill, and this would be on page, let's see. On page 4, at lines 3 through 6. The gist of the bill is a PSC rulemaking that would need to establish specifically what qualifies as an adverse impact to dispatchability and reliability of electric service. The new standard would be needed before a determination could be made as to whether the presumption established by the bill had been rebutted. The PSC standard would be a very, very important going forward because it would establish the level of investment required by the utilities, which of course becomes part of the costs paid by customers. Yet this standard is not something currently in the PSC rules and is currently an item established on a case-by-case basis for each utility rather than through a rulemaking. It is difficult to see how a meaningful standard can be put in the rules that is enforceable in court, as the bill calls for, yet applied to all utilities across the board. To make this point, the largest utility in Wyoming currently uses a 13% planning reserve margin to account for near-term and long-term planning uncertainties, whereas another large utility, but not the largest, uses a minimum planning reserve margin of 15%. Finding the highest common denominator would cost customers millions of dollars into the future without any guarantee of more reliable service. I'm also concerned about the number of rulemakings that are being sent over to the commission. As of Friday morning, there were, the PSC website showed that there was still a rulemaking from SF 159 from the 2019 session, still a rulemaking from House Bill 200 passed last year. And there are 3 bills, including this one, that would have PSC rulemakings. This is all in addition to the normal work of the PSC and likely in addition to an interim committee meeting this summer. As a ratepayer, I want the PSC and the Office of Consumer Advocate and others to be able to focus on the rate impacts of various legislative policies. The expertise of the PSC and these others would be better spent looking at the individual facts and circumstances of each utility's investment decisions, taking into account both reliability and cost. Keeping today's investments intact may be more costly to customers without adding any more reliability to the system. The PSC should use its time and talent sorting out those individual facts rather than working on a single standard through a rulemaking. I am not in support of the bill. However, if the bill is to live on, I ask you to consider some of the amendments that Commissioner Throne mentioned that are forthcoming, as well as some of the amendments that the Wyoming industrial consumers have offered and will discuss. Lastly, the phrase on page 5 at lines 1 and 2 of the bill, and the phrase is before the end of the facility's useful life. That's a very debatable phrase, since in the regulatory world, useful life is defined both physical and technical obsolescence. There's a lot of things that go into deciding whether a piece of equipment or a facility has met its useful life. And just assuming that it was built for so many years is not really the determining factor in terms of determining a useful life. For instance, cost, new policy, new replacement technology, all of those goes into that. So I think that phrase is likely to raise some controversy as well. And with that, I would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may be in one of the amendments, but as we contemplate page 5, lines 1 and 2, before the end of the facility useful life, is there a term of art that you think captures the intent without having the ambiguity that you suggest?
I was thinking about that, and I had not yet come up with a single easy phrase to replace that. I mean, I believe that the intent of the I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
Yeah, you better
I-
respond.
Pardon
Yeah.
me. So is that I believe the intent of the legislature, Senator Rothfuss, is basically shortening the life beyond what had been seen in prior cases. But I don't know that that is a definition that would fit all circumstances.
That's struck in. Other questions for
Denise
Yes.
Parrish, Parrish.
or Ms. Parrish? No? Thank you, Ms. Parrish, for coming and enlightening us.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak on House Bill 166? Step right up. Step right up to the microphone. You're on the air.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Thor Nelson. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Holland and Hart. I'm here today on behalf of the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers. Just for a little bit of context, the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers, or WIAC, are an association of 17 of the largest companies in Wyoming who happen to buy a tremendous amount of electricity from Rocky Mountain Power. And we are active in intervening in Wyoming Public Service Commission proceedings, as well as before the legislature, advocating on behalf of the consumers for low-cost, reliable electricity. WIAC members include oil and gas companies, trona companies, manufacturers, chemical companies, and cement companies, and things of that nature. Collectively, the WIAC members buy about 50% of the electricity sold by Rocky Mountain Power in the state of Wyoming. So obviously, these issues have a big impact on us. As a general principle, WIAC would support HB 166, provided that certain amendments are made, which I'm prepared to discuss with the committee today. And just to get a flavor, we also support 155, although would support the suggestion by Chairman Petrie to take the operative language of 155, put it in 166 so that we no longer have the definitional inconsistencies going forward. We just think that'll be a simpler solution. But let me just walk through the issues that we have with the bill. And as Mr. Jensen emailed the committee over the weekend and passed around to you a series of what's called the HB 166 WIAC proposed amendments. Now, importantly, I'll just mention this. There's two versions of this floating around. One was a version we had on Friday. You'll know that it's the version on Friday if in the section that says other possible amendments, there are 3 items. Between Friday and today, we actually were able to resolve disagreements on 2 of those. So the only other items, there should be just 1 of them listed. And so if you have that, then you have the most latest version.
I think committee, the one in your packet has the correct version.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
So just by way of overview, so these are amendments that we put together and then we socialized with the Public Service Commission, the Office of Consumer Advocate, Rocky Mountain Power, and Black Hills. The amendments that are listed in the main text, excepting the last one, were agreed to by all of those entities. We all think that those would be good amendments to the bill. And so those are a consensus, if you would, amongst the people we talked to. The last one I'll speak about separately. That's not a consensus amendment. That's supported by some, but not all of the people who I spoke to. Just real quickly, let me just walk through the different pieces of the amendments and explain why we are suggesting them. So going in sort of sequential order, the first proposal is to delete page 2, lines 6 through 10. That's the definition of baseload. And the issue with that is A, it's unnecessary, and B, it's slightly wrong. The definition of baseload in the bill speaks to operation that is continuous. And the reality is no generation is continuous. Coal plants have to go down for scheduled maintenance. And as a result of that, even a coal plant would not meet the definition of baseload. So simple solution is just to delete that definition and the place where it's used later in the bill. All of us agree that the terms dispatchable and reliable will encompass what we need to in order to focus this on the coal plants as the legislation is intended. The next edit you'll see on the proposed amendment is to delete the word early in 4 places. The reason we propose to delete the word early is that if you look carefully at the definition of retirement, retirement already encompasses the idea that it is before the end of the facility's useful life. And so the word early just creates an unnecessary confusion and duplication. The next one is on page 3, lines 12 through 14, and it's proposing to delete the phrase unless the public utility rebuts the presumption in this subsection by providing evidence deemed satisfactory to the commission that, and to replace that with the language unless the presumption in this subsection is rebutted by evidence deemed sufficient by the commission to establish that. The reason for that change, and I'll just say that this is the most important change to my membership. The reason for that change is that the language in the bill as originally drafted suggested that only the public utility can rebut the presumption, as opposed to, for example, my clients, electric consumers, or the Office of Consumer Advocate. We think that if any of us want to present evidence to rebut the presumption, we think we should be entitled to do so. And it shouldn't be limited to the public utility as the only person who could present that to the commission and have the commission make a determination on the presumption. So that is the intent of redoing that, to make it so it's not just the utility, but anybody can challenge that presumption. The next edit on the amendments is just the conforming edit to delete the baseload electricity. As I mentioned, that definition is problematic, so simpler to better delete it. Next, page 4, lines 3 through 6, we urge the committee to delete the second sentence in Roman numeral 3. That sentence is the sentence that requires a rulemaking for purposes of establishing reliability. This is one of the subjects of Ms. Parrish's testimony, which you heard a moment ago. The issue with a rulemaking is that a rulemaking requires that all utilities be treated the same, but with respect to reliability considerations, there actually are important differences probably between the different utilities that the commission regulates. And so our recommendation, WIAC's recommendation, supported by others, is that the commission be allowed to do that on a utility by utility basis, considering the specific facts and circumstances of each utility, instead of in a statewide process, which would be very difficult and hard to imagine getting a successful outcome.
Mr. Nelson, I'm not following you quite on that. On page 4, line 3 through 6, you're eliminating the entire sentence?
The second sentence.
Second sentence entirely?
Yes, which is right.
Yeah.
Because by eliminating the second sentence, then the first sentence will just be applied on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, the next suggestion that we make is to, in page 4, lines 21 through 23, and page 5, lines 1 through 6, delete the definition of retirement there and instead add a cross-reference to the definition that's already in there in 37 to 134. The last amendment that, like I said, everybody came to agreement on was page 5, line 12. Delete the words new non-coal or non-natural gas. So this section of the bill is the bill which provides the penalty. That is, if you retire a plant without overcoming the presumption, then you can't recover the cost of new generation. But when the bill added new non-coal or non-gas, what that means is that you could take a plant that's currently running, fail to meet the presumption, retire it, and then build a brand new coal plant instead and not face the penalty. And from a consumer perspective, that makes no sense. If we got a plant that's running, it's cheap, it's old, it's been depreciated, why are we replacing it with a brand new one if we haven't overcome the presumption about retiring the old one? Okay, so.
All right, stop there.
Oh, yes, sir.
I don't have that on page 5, line 12, where this engrossed copy, I don't have new non-coal and non-natural gas
Okay,
on that page. Maybe it's already been taken out.
so I don't think so. It's on the engrossed version that's on the website anyway.
You got one? I don't know.
I've got the green one. It's in the green.
Oh, it's in the green one? Okay. I got a white one that I copied. Yeah, no, I have it. I have it. Thank you.
Do you see that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. And then before I get to the item that's in some dispute, I would just add, Commissioner Throne offered a proposal to, on page 2, line 13, delete the phrase including dispatchability. And on page 3, line 7, delete the phrase including reliability. And we would have no objection to those edits. We think those are good edits as well. So we would support that. And then finally, relative to what we supported, Chairman Petrie suggested the possibility of taking the paragraph in 155 that you find at 37 to 134B and moving that paragraph in its entirety into 166. And the reality is you could move it in the exact same spot. You could make that 134B and take the paragraphs B, C, and D and just renumber those after, and it fits in very nicely. And that way you, like I said, avoid the definitional inconsistencies. And I think both of these bills are trying to do the same thing. And so makes good logical sense. The only thing that we also would support the recommendation, if you did that, to take the word closure, which you'll find on page 2, line 11 of the engrossed version of 155, and replace that with the word retirement, which is the defined term that we're using in 166. So you can move that paragraph over, replace closure with retirement, and we think that the bills would work together very nicely and only have one bill to move forward.
Oh, I see. You're saying closure on the 155 paragraph B.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
replace
saying
that.
put retirement on that one.
Right, which will then invoke the defined term, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ruffus, that clear that up for you?
No, I saw that one. I missed the second location that was suggested by Commissioner Throne for and includes dispatchability. I have the one on page 2, line 13, but I'm sorry, I was in another meeting
No problem.
and missed it when Commissioner Throne suggested it the first time. Where was that?
Page 3, line 7 of the engrossed bill, it's a definition of reliable, and it includes, and you have at the very tail of that and includes
And-
reliability.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see we, back to where I was, page 4, I believe it is, line 1. There's still an early in there that would Probably need to leave it out.
So
too.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, if you look at the proposed amendment that I circulated, you'll see there's actually 4 places that early appears. Page 3, lines 10, 17, and 20,
There it is.
and page 4, line 1.
Thank you.
You're
sir.
exactly right. And all of those would appropriately be deleted to be consistent with the definition that's already there. And then, if I might, Mr. Chairman, the last thing I'll talk about is the term that's debated. The way that 166 is structured was explained by Representative Harshman and the other witnesses. The idea is that there's this presumption against the retirement unless 3 conditions are met. One is you figure out we don't need the power, there's no capacity need. 2, you figure out that there's no impact on reliability, that is, the system will continue to be reliable. And 3, that there will be significant cost savings. WIAC's issue from the perspective of the consumers is only with the word significant. And our theory is, look, if we don't need the power and if we're not impacting reliability, then we think we should try to get cost savings, even if, depending on the point of view of the person that's involved, they're not necessarily significant. And we have a concern that the word significant is going to lead potentially to unnecessary litigation. And let me explain why. In the context of Rocky Mountain Power, a 1% change in rates, which someone may say is not significant because it's only 1%, nevertheless is $8 million a year approximately, somewhere between $7 and $8 million a year. So from the perspective of the Wyoming customers, my clients who buy a lot of that electricity and pay about half the bill, $3.5, $4 million a year, we think is significant, but someone else may think isn't significant. And so our perspective is, why create that fight? The bill puts the presumption in place and it gives the commission the discretion to decide whether or not that presumption is satisfied. And we think that in order to avoid a fight over what is significant, better to delete it, leave the commission with the discretion to do what is in the best interest of Wyoming, understanding that they will weigh all of these issues and considerations. So from our perspective, we would either recommend that you delete significant, or if you feel like it's important to have some standard in there for the cost savings, we would be okay with the word sufficient, which then weighs the impacts of the need for the power and the reliability. Either one of those would be okay. But we have a concern with the word significant, again, because of the litigation and the fact that if we don't need the power and we don't need it for reliability, we should try to get any cost savings we can to make sure that Wyoming customers get the least cost power possible. So those are our comments, and we urge the committee to consider the amendments that we've offered. And if you agree with those amendments, then WIAC would support 166. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
On the
Mr.
significant discussion, did you get out of thesaurus and try and work through alternatives?
To be fair, we all spent a fair bit of time with it. I laugh only because Commissioner Throne, when we spoke about this on Friday, said, yes, she actually got out of thesaurus and went through it. And so there's been a fair bit of back and forth about what that is. And if the committee has a better word, that's all great. But from our perspective, the key is you create a presumption, you give the commission discretion. You don't need to overmanage the process with a word like that, is our perspective, but others disagree. And so that's why that's not part of the kind of consensus amendment that we're presenting, but it's an issue that from WIAC's perspective, we'd ask the committee to consider.
Chairman.
Yes. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to speak real briefly about exactly where you're talking about inserting the lines from 155. I'm reading that to be on page 3, roughly line 8. Would that be correct, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, absolutely. That's correct. At page 3, line 8 would be where the 155 language would be inserted, and then the remaining paragraphs renumbered, if that was the committee's pleasure, which we think would make sense.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
would you say that then eliminates the need for 155?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, yes, so as 155 has been amended so far, that's the only sort of substantive piece of that bill, and that will then be fully accomplished by the combined bill going forward from our perspective.
Other questions for Thor? No other questions for Thor? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Anyone else on 166?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dave Pickard. I'm representing Glenrock Energy. And we have some proposed amendments that I believe that the committee has on 166. And then Representative Gray, when he was here will be here to present 155. He has some proposed amendments that we have suggested. But in the interest of time, I would encourage you to go ahead and bring Michael Nassy in. I believe that he's on the Zoom. And we'll address the components of both of those sets of amendments. And I guess a little bit for clarification, are we just operating off of 166 now? Or, okay,
Yes.
I appreciate that.
So can we bring Mr. Massey on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and then I also wanted to let you know, Ms. Shannon Anderson has also had her hand raised since the meeting started as well, so I can promote her. And then there are a couple others, so if anybody else is interested in talking, can they please raise their virtual hand and then they'll be promoted to panelists.
Mr. Massey, are you ready to talk to the committee?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Other senators, appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of some amendments to House Bill 166. It's an honor to have worked with many of you in the context of Energy Council and advisory capacity, and certainly with the governor and his staff, and the great work they've done, along with legislative leadership on bills of the last couple of sessions. Mr. Pickard identified that we have a few amendments, and I'll walk through them in a second. I want to just kind of set a stage for some commentary about, why is it that more is needed this session. I can't say enough about how great a job Wyoming has done in prior sessions with SF 159 and House Bill 200. I work across the country and I direct attention to those bills all the time as really nation leading ideas about promoting carbon capture, utilization, and storage, about how to take a real firm grasp of reliability and not let units be retired, certainly not prematurely, and always looking at the opportunities that exist for CCUS deployment. The urgency, the reason that I think, certainly, and I'll stand for questions as well, but the reason for the testimony and for Glenrock's work with many of you this session is to make sure that the potential and promise of those two great bills actually gets realized and not frustrated by the mere passage of time. There's nothing inherently wrong with either of those bills. It's just that I think the intention of those that I was working with when those bills were first developed and ultimately passed was that public utility response to them would be more timely than it has become. Mr. Luthi did a great job of capturing that sentiment and perhaps some surprise that we haven't had more proactive cooperation. Why then is 2021 a critical session to do something about that? And I think it's really important to understand that I think it is probably the most critical session Wyoming will have. And here's why. We have a federal tax credit, the 45Q tax credit, that set forth an economic opportunity for CCUS. We have an investment by the Department of Energy in support of the US Congress, at least $2 billion that's already open for application. And there is, frankly, a race for these dollars. And then the 45Q opportunity is set to close at the end of 2023. Sounds like a long time from now. It's not. From a power development standpoint, it's yesterday. Even if we get a 2-year extension on that tax credit, it's effectively going to be tomorrow because of the amount of time it takes to get a large capital project off the ground, financed and going. And so even though SF 159 and House Bill 200 create this, frankly, dream team to get CCUS development on existing coal-fired generation in Wyoming. It's not happening. And if the intentions of the utilities are not brought to bear, and so some of the amendment language will provide would encourage a certification that in fact the utility is serious about complying with those laws. Unless we see that stepped up this session, I fear, and I think there's a good basis to fear, that Wyoming will have lost the window. And because I think everybody in the room who cares about those that are involved with coal communities and power generation knows that once those units close, they're gone forever. They are an incredible opportunity for the state and for the country to be able to commercialize and drive down the cost of CCUS to take advantage of these federal incentives. So that's the reason there's a sense of urgency. It's not a second guessing of what the priorities of the legislative leadership are. It's really just to try to point out that sense of urgency. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would be glad to walk through the amendments, answer questions. I'm not sure what you would prefer. If it's easier logistically, if you have the amendments or Mr. Picard wants to walk through them, I can do it remotely. Just tell me what your preference is.
I don't know. Do we have those amendments, Mike?
I have not received anyone other than the ones from the WIEC.
See if they're on the web.
Yeah, my understanding was that they would be distributed. And while they're looking, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can just give you some context. I am testifying remotely today. I'd much rather be in Wyoming. Love the state. I'm in Texas, and actually, literally as we speak, the Texas legislature is debating omnibus legislation to deal with the fact, the tragedy of our power outage down here. And I can tell you that about 5 years ago, there was a sense of urgency amongst some of us that we were about to lose a bunch of baseload capacity in our market. And there were many, including some large industrial consumers, that didn't have that same sense of urgency. It's not their fault. What happened last month happened, but I can assure you every legislature that's on the floor of the Senate debating that bill now, and every House member that's going to be debating bills tomorrow that are trying to address the issue after the fact wishes they had taken a much harder look at the consequences of retiring coal plants and growing the renewable fleet. I'm an all the above guy, and I think that both Wyoming and Texas can benefit greatly from renewable energy growth. But the reality is that what happened in Texas is not some academic distant example. It is an extraordinary cautionary tale for any state that has a vital baseload dispatchable fleet that has the potential to lose that fleet on the promise that everything will be fine when we deploy renewable energy. And I know y'all get that. I know the governor gets that. And I know that's what SF 159 and House Bill 200 were designed to help prevent and at the same time commercialize CCUS. What I just said in my kind of layout is that if you all don't act this session, hopefully through an amendment to this bill, or perhaps to the next bill we hear today, 155, I fear that the clock is going to be run, and that the utilities activities are not going to start soon enough. There won't be adequate commitments made soon enough. And I certainly am prepared to talk about any number of arguments that get levied against CCUS or slowing down retirements, but I don't think I actually need to convince anybody on this committee or in the body there, because I think you all get it probably better than anybody in the country. What I do think is happening, however, is that sense of urgency perhaps is not where it needs to be. And I know that my good friends and colleagues that are debating bills in Texas right now wish they had their 5 years back. And I would just not want to ever have left this session without emphasizing that point, because no matter how much people might say, oh, that was a different problem, it's a different market design, it's a bigger state, different state. If you look at the scenario of retirement of coal units and the influx of renewables, it is the same scenario that Wyoming is on the front end of. So I would debate gladly anybody on any stage about how relevant Texas is and how directly relevant Texas is to the Wyoming debate. And you all have something even more powerful, which is you have unanimity within your leadership and your executive branch of how CCUS can solve both problems, can solve the reliability and low cost energy problem, but also the carbon dioxide question for the coming generations. So with that, I think maybe the amendments are available, Chairman.
Mr. Massey, we certainly agree that we should have had this done some time ago. And we need to have it done now. So yes, we have the amendments now. If you want to go over them, please.
Yes, I think the comment's already been made by Mr. Nelson about the term early. I don't know if it's for the same reasons, but we certainly, the first three items on the amendments you have and the fifth item relate to that. So both on the engrossed version, page 3, line 10, page 3, line 17, page 3, line 20, and page 4, line 1, replacing or deleting the term early. Item 4 on the amendment list that was just distributed to you, hopefully, is to delete the phrase "and" or the word "and" at page 3, line 22. And on the number 6 item is on page 4, line 6, delete the period and replace it with a semicolon. Just getting some technical corrections here. And here's where the big substance comes in. On page 4, line 7, we're proposing that new subsections 4, Romanet 4, 5, and 6 be added to read as follows. The public utility first made a good effort to sell the facility for continued use as a coal-fired generation facility and has considered in good faith any offer to purchase such facility for continued use as a coal-fired electric generation facility. That language is probably pretty familiar. It strikes at the heart of the desires and letter and intent of SF 159. And it's actually ensuring that that component be directly integrated into this kind of retirement framework of House Bill 166. The next Romanet 5 would read, from the date the public utility first announced or informed the commission that it planned to retire the electric generation facility, the public utility considered but rejected in good faith all reasonable efforts to receive to purchase the electric generation facility as determined by the commission. And Romanet 6, for purposes of this section, the commission shall presume that an offer to purchase the coal-fired electric generation facility, and this is the key phrase, at the facility's net book value constitutes a reasonable purchase price. That is where we are basically trying to say, add some definition to SF 159. These changes are entirely consistent with the implementation that's been done to date at the Public Service Commission, and frankly, bring to this very important decision on retirements the compliance piece and the intent of 159. Item 8 on the amendment list, page 4, line 15, is another early to strike. That's one of those. And then item 9, line 17, to add the following subsection. Subsection E, which would read, no later than January 1st of 2022, a public utility subject to the section shall submit to the commission a certificate that demonstrates its compliance with WS 37-3-117 regarding the good faith efforts to sell the coal-fired facility. And so that's basically certifying compliance with SF 159, and that the public utility, Romanet 1, affirms that it will forego requesting authorization prior to 2030 to retire a coal-fired generation facility in the state, or 2, demonstrates that it has commenced good faith efforts to install carbon capture, utilization, and storage at all of its coal-fired generation facilities in the state, consistent with the goals of Title 37, Chapter 18, which for reference is the provisions created by House Bill 200. The last 2 items on the list in the amendments is page 5, lines 1 through 2, delete before the end of the facility's useful life. Similar comments were previously made. On item 11 is page 5, lines 4 through 6, to delete, quote, to where it is no longer cost effective for the facility to continue operating, period, end quote. And So my intro remarks, Chairman, and certainly I'll stand for questions on any and all of that. But my intro remarks obviously line up with the substance of a couple of those amendments, basically putting forward right now a certification requirement that says, listen, if you know, and here's why, for example, House Bill 200 needs this help. The thoughtful language of both the governor's office and the legislative leadership was to ensure that by 2030, a low carbon portfolio standard that included dispatchable, basically CCUS equipped technology was being met. And it also instructed the PSC to have some interim standards, but didn't specify that date. The idea would be things would get going. Nothing has been established yet, but it's on its way. What this does is say, while the PSC moves toward implementation of that, we really need to know, is the utility in or not? Is it going to retire it? Is it going to pursue a good faith sale and accept a net book value offer, or that it will, or is it, you know, or is it going to equip it itself or host a CCUS project? Because without that kind of commitment, basically, like I said, the clock can be run out in terms of the ability to seize upon the opportunity of the 45Q credit and the dollars that are available at the federal level. And frankly, the opportunity and urgency to get this technology off the ground so it can be deployed worldwide. So with that, I'll stand for questions. Chairman, thank you.
All right, Mr. Massey, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I honestly don't know enough and haven't studied these concepts since I just got the amendment to know whether they'll be better or worse, or whether they need some improvement or some additional coordination. But my question, Mr. Chairman, is who else has reviewed this? It doesn't, I don't get a sense that WIAC has taken a look at it. And I wanted to know if this has been well circulated and vetted, or if this is something that we should get circulated and vetted before we really incorporate it into the bill draft. I mean, we're always balancing and walking a fine line on these bills. So I'm a little concerned about that. Who else has coordinated with this?
Well, it's my understanding that there's been quite a bit of discussion for those on the ground there. I'll defer to Mr. Pickard if he wants to come up and explain the context of those discussions.
Great.
Mr. Massey, I have a question on that 6 there. At the facility net book value constitutes a reasonable purchase price. Isn't that kind of getting into the business of the utility that what they sell their property for?
Well, I mean, certainly the desire is to bring SF 159 into the direct fold of the experience that Glenrock and I think other potential developers of CCS technology are concerned with, is that we don't get a sense that we are getting a good idea of what it's going to take. And so we're trying to forward a concept that we would think would be a sufficient and agreeable term to a utility. If the net book value is, you know, it would seemingly be if their arguments for retirement are that they're losing money or that consumers would be exposed to cost if they continue to operate those plants, then a net book value offer would be a very good one indeed. And so we are trying to basically call, I mean, I don't want to say it this way, but almost call the bluff. If that should be an agreeable term. If you have a coal unit, kind of like having a car that you've paid for, and you're basically proposing to trade that thing in and buy a new one and subject your consumers to a new car payment, which is what happens when you replace paid for perfectly good generation with new stuff. I would, you know, we're trying to get to the bottom of what is it going to take for these units to change hands so that people who are more willing to deploy CCUS and fulfill the promise of House Bill 200 can have an opportunity to do so, because we feel like the clock's being run on us and we don't have a good sense that cooperation is forthcoming without this kind of direction from the legislature.
Other questions for Mr. Massey? Other questions for Mr. Massey? If not, thank you, Mr. Massey. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for allowing me to join remotely, sir.
Did somebody say Mr. Pickard had something to add to this? Oh, okay. All right, let's go back here then. Back to the back room. Come on up. Thank you.
And good afternoon, Chairman Anderson and members of the committee. I'm Wally Walski, former chairman of the Goshen County Commissioners and immediate past state director of USDA Rural Development for Wyoming. I come before you today speaking as a private citizen. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to address your committee in support of the proposed amendments by Mr. Nassy. I will keep my comments brief and focus my remarks upon a couple of supportive factors for your committee's consideration. I want to start by identifying current internal and external regulatory controls affecting our coal industry and close by probing the current financial assistance opportunities obtainable for both citizens and our state. Let me begin by saying external affairs are decisions taking place outside the boundaries of Wyoming affecting our state. Case in point, West Coast states denying Wyoming an opportunity to export Powder River coal abroad. External actions by other states negatively impacting Wyoming's economy. On the other hand, internal undertakings, decisions happening within our state, such as legislative guidance and regulatory oversight. Case in point, the closure of reliable coal-fired power plants located inside the state of Wyoming. These internal decisions will play an ultimate role and dictate the immediate fate of carbon capture while determining the final destiny of baseload generation. Internal procedures will define the future viability of Wyoming's existing coal fleet. An important indirect benefit associated with carbon capture is enhanced oil recovery for revitalizing oil fields, which could mean a significant economic boost for struggling Wyoming communities, along with welcomed assistance for bringing back good-paying jobs to our energy sector. I want to take a moment to address a completely different component, the timing issue. The Department of Energy recently announced $40 billion will be made available for clean air ventures, including projects to capture and store CO2 emissions. The proposed SCALE Act may offer additional millions of federal dollars for building infrastructure pipelines, transporting carbon emissions into underground storage locations. Both of these incentives could leverage state and private dollars, but only if amended House Bill 166 is successfully passed into law. In my humble opinion, now is an opportune time for embracing a proactive stance to fully take advantage of these important financial assistance while funding options remain available. During the time I had the pleasure of serving as Wyoming State Director of Rural Development, I personally witnessed hundreds of millions of dollars dispersed nationally for rural broadband expansion. Unfortunately, Wyoming received less than 1% of the targeted funding. Now there is billions of federal dollars available for carbon capture, and it's my hope Wyoming will do a much better job taking advantage of this financial incentive for carbon capture than what I previously observed with rural broadband funding. I firmly believe timing is everything, and now seems to be an ideal time for taking a practical approach for capitalizing upon these federal assistance program. In closing, let me just say, I have lived here in Wyoming my entire life. I love this state, and I'm very passionate about our frontier way of life, and I remain optimistic about our future. I have spent a big part of my life associated with rural electric cooperatives, including 15 years on the board of directors of Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, and served as president of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I fully understand what is at stake. I understand the history of fossil fuel generation, and maybe more importantly, I understand the value of the one-time financial enticement currently on the table. Wyoming has a unique opportunity for becoming a national leader by retrofitting existing power plants with carbon storage innovative technology. I strongly urge the committee to not overlook this golden opportunity for making a positive impact upon our future. Wyoming can lead by example, and other states will follow in our footsteps. I respectfully ask for your favorable consideration of the proposed amendments before you today and passage of House Bill 166 out of committee and onto the floor of the Senate. The big picture and bottom line, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is whether or not coal-fired power plants will continue to provide dispatchable baseload generation or become decommissioned and eliminated forever as a part of Wyoming's energy mix of the future. Thank you, Chairman Anderson and members of the committee, for your dedicated service on behalf of ordinary citizens like myself back home. I am now happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Wuschke? Questions, no questions. You covered it quite nicely. Thank you, Mr. Wuschke.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Cox with Rocky Mountain Power. I'm here today to speak. I wasn't intending to speak in opposition to these proposed amendments. We have just seen them along with other folks here in the room and have significant concerns with these proposed amendments that were just suggested by the previous speaker and the one before. Although some of these concepts are familiar, as they were found in two bills on the House side that did not advance through the House Minerals Committee, House Bill 258 and 259. I'll just flag a few things that are especially concerning from these amendments. One, establishing the price of—
Which amendment are you looking at?
I'm referring to the amendments that were just presented by Glenrock Energy, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, so one item that was flagged by one member of the committee, setting the price of the purchase of a coal-fired generation unit at the facility's net book value. That would essentially be the state of Wyoming inserting itself to set the price of a commercial transaction. Each of our coal units are at different depreciation schedules. In the case of the coal plant respective to this particular project, it's nearing the end of its depreciable life. And so effectively, you could have the state of Wyoming dictating here by force of law the price point and potentially giving of a coal unit for free to a third party, irrespective of if there's any other interested party out there that may purchase that coal unit. Also, the false choice saying that by January 1st, 2022, the utility has to either say it will not retire any coal plant by 2030 or begin installing carbon capture on all of its coal-fired generation facilities. House Bill 200 does require a public utility. This is from last year. House Bill 200 does require a public utility to utilize carbon capture. And we're working with the commission to ascertain what that would look like. House Bill 200, though, also established a price cap at 2% customer rate impact, essentially saying, we want you to do this, but only up to this price point. 2% for us amounts to approximately $15 million a year. So a capital investment somewhere in the neighborhood of about $150 million. We estimate that to put carbon capture on a coal-fired generation plant would be significantly more. That's just one unit. So this particular bill says we would be required to do it on all 11 coal units that we have in the state of Wyoming. Frankly, it just doesn't work with HB 200. Obviously, federal funding will have to be a component of any carbon capture project, but to suggest that we could get there on all of our coal-fired units is impractical, especially at that 2% customer cap. I will just briefly say, I know your time is short, Mr. Chair. The previous amendments that were suggested by our industrial customers, we are supportive of those amendments. We think it improves the bill. We still have concerns with the underlying bill. We think it does create some additional risks, but we do support those amendments from our customers. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Cox? Questions for Mr. Cox? No questions. Thank you, Mr. Cox. Anyone else from the audience like to speak? Anyone else from the audience like to speak? I think we have some more speakers on the virtual. Shannon, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. And our organization is actively involved in utility issues in multiple forums. And I personally have worked on topics related to coal-fired power plants in Wyoming for over 13 years. So we bring these comments with that perspective and background in mind. On behalf of our approximately 2,000 members throughout the state, we express our opposition to Senate File 166. As you've been hearing today, we just believe the bill is too flawed in its current form with vague and problematic terms and conditions that will just make it incredibly difficult for the Public Service Commission and utilities to implement. We believe that the bill will negatively change the way utilities in our state are regulated in very significant ways. And those changes will be passed along in the form of cost and risk to utility customers. We believe the bill is duplicative and conflicting with existing utility requirements for cost and reliability for service. The bill is duplicative and conflicting with the Senate File 159 rulemaking that was recently wrapped up. And we would disagree with Mr. Nazi about his amendments being consistent with that Senate File 159 rulemaking process. They're not. And in fact, would add a lot of complexity to the 159 process that, again, many of us just spent a year of our lives experiencing in a rulemaking that just got wrapped up. So we ask you to let the Senate File 159 process and the rules stand on their own because they were the product of substantial time and discussion among many parties appearing before the Public Service Commission. And as you've heard, some of the bill's definitions are conflicting with House Bill 200 rulemaking that's currently underway with the Public Service Commission. So in short, Mr. Chairman, we believe this bill adds nothing to the rulemaking processes that have been implemented in those recently passed laws and will actually detract from the progress that stakeholders in the commission have made over the past year and continue to make in the House Bill 200 rulemaking. Mr. Chairman, the bill allows a utility to rebut the presumption against closure of a coal plant, but the bill's vague terms will create a regulatory uncertainty and legal disputes among parties about whether a utility has adequately done so. For instance, on page 3, line 16, what does significant mean? We would echo the concerns of Mr. Nelson about the problems with that term. And then on line 21 on that same page, on page 3, what does insufficient mean? And looking at the definition of baseload on page 2, lines 6 through 10, we question whether any electricity generating source is truly baseload electricity. As you heard from Mr. Nelson, certainly the coal plants operating in Wyoming today are not operating continuously every minute of every day in order to meet that definition standard. We also note that Romanet 3 on the top of page 4 requires rulemaking to implement, as Ms. Parrish and Mr. Nelson mentioned, but Romanets 1 and 2 do not. We agree with Mr. Nelson that generally applicable rulemaking might not be the best way to go to apply the terms to utilities, but there is a problem with the vagueness of the terms as set forth in the bill and case-by-case application just creates more regulatory uncertainty. And along those lines, Mr. Chairman, we are very concerned about the penalty provisions in the bill, starting at the bottom of page 4. It is impossible to insulate customers from these costs and risks. The penalty provisions will negatively affect utility credit ratings and could have a chilling effect on utility investment in the state, including, ironically, investments made in transmission that will have positive benefits for reliability and cost of service. We again note that the penalty provision that is being amended was a main subject in the Senate File 159 rulemaking, and this new law adds uncertainty to those recently finished regulations. Mr. Chairman, we understand that there's a lot of concern about what will happen when coal plants are closed. But it's also important to note that only a few units are currently slated for early retirement. And there is plenty of time to make sure we get the answers right to all of your questions about cost and reliability. We encourage you to work proactively with our utilities to find solutions to any potential problems that may exist. This bill adds bureaucratic process and results in regulatory uncertainty. And again, it will add up additional costs in utility lawyers and company analysis, costs that will just be passed along to customers. And for those reasons, we would support the amendments from WIAC, but we don't believe it solves the fundamental flaws in the bill. And Mr. Chairman, just on House Bill 155, because I know time's short on that one as well, and there's been talk about merging them together, we would just echo the concerns and comments you've heard already, that 155 contains duplicative and conflicting language with House Bill 166 and previous bills that I've talked about, 159 and 200. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Ms. Anderson? Any questions? Having none, thank you, Ms. Anderson, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the tube?
Mr. Chairman, not at this time.
No hands raised, huh? All right, with that, we'll close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Cooper, seconded by Wasserberger. All right, is there any changes you'd like to make? Is there any changes you'd like to make? We have two proposed amendments to the bill. If we could deal with them in their entirety, maybe. There's the HB 166 WIEC proposed amendments. Would anybody like to move that?
I would move that. Second.
Moved and seconded to do the WIEC proposed amendments.
And Mr. Chairman,
Any
that-
discussion? Yes.
I would just say that I would include the page 3, line 16 optional strike of the word significant. So the entirety of the amendment.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Yes.
That's fine.
Anything else on that amendment? Yes, Mr. Cooper.
There are a couple of earlies that they missed on that one too, sir. Page 5, line 16. And
Well, I think the earlies are all on that other amendment.
no, I believe they did miss 2, sir.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
They missed page 4, line 15, I believe.
Page 4, line 15.
Not seeing it on the
Okay.
C one, and page 5, line 16. If we could add those to that amendment. Just to-
Friendly amendment. Take the earlies off of page 4, line 15 and page 5, line 16. Any other additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, sensing the body's ready to vote on the amendment. The proposed amendment is the WIEC proposed amendments. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion carries, or that amendment carries. Yes. Wasserberger. All right, we have one other proposed amendment.
Chairman.
Mr. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it'd be prudent for the committee to give time to all of the stakeholders to consider this amendment, the additional Romanettes that we have here, as well as the additional provisions. We heard some testimony that suggested concern, and I would want to make sure that we kind of got unanimity of support before we would make additional amendments. So I'd suggest that we hold back on this one and ask the advocates to work with the community and then come back to us and see if there are there's some common vision here, but I wouldn't be comfortable right now with that amendment.
So would your proposal be that we
Move on.
we table House Bill 166 until we get these amendments
Mr. Chair,
processed?
no, I mean, we could do that. That's an option if we want to do that. Alternatively, it would be a committee of the whole, second reading, third reading amendment. It's really up to the committee whether we want to move this out now. I also honestly would be perfectly comfortable if we're going to do House Bill 155, I'd rather move it into this bill and be clean as well. So
I don't think we have time for 155 right at the moment. We're 10 minutes to 2.
it might be wise to lay this back, then do 155 at the beginning of next time, decide whether it's a good policy, then bring this one off the table.
Without objection, we'll lay this back and work it on Wednesday with 155 and see if we can blend them and see what you want to do on the amendments to substitute Bill 166 also.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. Thank you.
Okay, all right. You heard what we're going to do. That's all we're going to do today. So thank you for attending and thank you for your input. Geez.